Hello and welcome to Lutherans Alive. This is the program that seeks to tell the stories of Lutheran Christians and their ministries here in Southwestern Pennsylvania, and we do that believing that God is doing wonderful things for us and through us. I'm Pastor Tony Schneck, pleased to be your host on the program today. Actually, here interviewing today one of my predecessors, a former host of this Lutherans Alive program, Pastor David Wasemann. Dave, welcome to the program. Welcome,
nice to be here.
Welcome back to the program.
Exactly.
And David, you are here today to talk about some interim ministry right now. You happen to be serving at Grove Chapel, Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel in the Northwest Synod of our ELCA, Northwestern Pennsylvania Synod of our ELCA. Can you say a few words about the community in which you're serving right now?
Well, it's interesting because I was in Metro DC Synod for 20 years. I was with a church that began in 1988. I entered in 1991, and it was a fascinating experience because it was a new church and it was a mission development and, of course, the ultimate development of the building and that sort of thing. But throughout my time there, I actually still thought about ultimately going into interim ministry. And so as I came to the conclusion that my time was done, or coming to a close in Metro DC, I sought out information about interim ministry. And then I found out there was another word that people put in there, and that's intentional interim. And so when I went to receive my training, I came to understand, well, there's an interim ministry that a person could do in the vacancy period from one pastor to another. And that could be supplying necessary pastoral care. So that would include worship and pastoral visits and that sort of thing. Intentional interim ministry takes the interim process into a distinct 5 focus points. And that can be very helpful because not only are you addressing the status quo, but you're dealing with 5 areas that can be very helpful in terms of elucidation of the past and then moving into the future. And it can focus a congregation, can ask salient questions, can learn very important lessons, and can summarize appropriately so that you move further in the intentional interim process and supply a wonderful, relatively healthy, faithful congregational community for the next pastor.
It's unfortunate that sometimes I think we get into the habit of thinking of that interim time as sort of almost a down time, or even worse, maybe a dead time where there's nothing really going on. We're in between pastors. We can't do anything until we get a newly called pastor. But there's something very wonderful about treasuring that transition time, and as you say, being very intentional about that time and making the best of it and moving the congregation forward rather than just kind of doing maintenance, but rather moving the congregation forward.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Can you say some things about those 5 focus points that you mentioned?
Exactly. The first thing you do is look back, and you seek every ounce, at least a lot, of the heritage of the congregation, or in my case, the 2 congregations, the parish. And in doing so, which we've done, for instance, at Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel, you unearth wonderful things, and it's about past members of the church. It's about pastors. It's about ministry. It's about everything. And it's about high points and low points, and what's most important is you find the thread of the being of, for instance, Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel. And when you find, it's like the silver lining or whatever, or the thread, it helps you weave together the story. And it helps you, even for instance, we have elder members now that are in our local nursing center, senior care place. Well, you realize, well, they were Sunday school teachers, and they were organists, or they were, and so you come to appreciate who they are now and what they contributed, and so you have the heritage. Then you have the mission, which is a loaded word, and that takes some deft questions and introspection and so on and so forth. But what is Harmony Grove, for instance, in this case, Harmony Grove's mission, Grove Chapel's mission? And so, you put that down. And then you get into leadership. How do you understand the development of leadership, the operation of the relationship between leadership and pastor, and how that is taking us into the next day's ministry and such. So you have heritage, you have mission, you have leadership, then you have connections. Now you can see how this all comes together. The connections have to do with everything from connecting with the local community, the context of the primary service area, to the synod, nurturing the relationship with the bishop and the assistants and the ministry focus of the synod, the ELCA, and then just all kinds of community things, law enforcement, emergency services, connecting in every aspect. How does this church or this parish connect? And then the future. And instead of just waiting for the next pastor to come in who's new to everything, okay, you do some future work. And the neat thing is, look at the way that your heritage and your question of mission, your leadership focus, and your connecting, see how does that play together so that you come to a sense of your future. And this is delicate, because in one sense you could very well authentically come to a place where the congregation or congregations say, we're now really in hospice mode. And and you hear congregations that come to that conclusion, and they decide, well, what are we going to do for the future? And they'll sell their buildings and donate that to the synod for other, mission support and that sort of thing. But for instance, we just went through that sort of moment, and they said, well, no, we're not. We see a future here. We don't know all the details, but we see a future here. Then that means that we have to do a different sort of a game plan to get them into the beginning, to get them even into the declaration of the commitment of that future, and then the steps towards it. And, it's a fascinating process. And that's where, I'm careful about words sometimes, and somebody will say, well, interim ministry, intentional interim. Well, what's the difference, And so I do, in a sense, defend the idea of that additional word, intention, because it simply means that we've been very well trained and support this distinct focal point process, this 5-point process. And, in addition to, well, have they had a congregational fiscal audit? Have they done a review of their constitution? All the kind of paperwork that's involved. But, so that's the 5 focus points.
I think you rightly defend that intentional interim ministry, and it certainly does have its place. And we're going to talk some more about that with Pastor Dave Wasemann as soon as we take a short break here on Lutherans Alive. thanks for being with us here on Lutherans Alive. We're continuing our conversation with Pastor Dave Wasemann about intentional interim ministry. Dave, how many congregations have you served in this capacity of intentional interim ministry?
It's an interesting question. The easy answer is this is my first. And as much as I watched interims in the D.C. Synod and learned about certain protocols and that sort of thing, the one thing that strikes me about intentional interim ministry, and this being my first, is I never thought about how you engage, you develop relationships, you love the people and they love you back, and then you're leaving. And heading in, we all know that an interim is exactly that. And a part of the call letter says you're not eligible for call there. So we're clear. And that's an important factor. But once I got into relationship with Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel, I'm thinking, wow, so it's my first. And it's been a fascinating transition from being in a church almost 20 years to into, a place where I'm not there for a long, long time, I'm there for a designated period to do the 5 focus points and hopefully transition to a pastor, and that pastor will be, ready to come in and love the people and lead the people and move along without hindrances or conflict, or other problematic situations.
Yeah. The 5 focus points that you spoke of earlier, the heritage, mission, leadership, the connections, and then the future, all of those things, gosh, those sound like good things for any ministry, whether it be intentional interim ministry or long-term ministry. Those seem to me like good things to focus on, good things to know about.
Well, that's why intentional interim ministry is so profound, because any church of any sort could it's kind of like pause, reflect, and review, and then so on and just come to a summary. Yeah, any church, because it's a wonderful moment to use that discipline to answer the questions of, like, who have we been in the past, who and what have we been and how we have been, all those kind of journalistic sort of questions, and then to move through in a deliberate manner and all those 5 areas. That's wonderful, because it puts everything on the table, and it even can disclose, oh, here was a glitch. See, we didn't bring this up, but we handed off this glitch over the years. Might not be a major glitch, but might just be something symptomatic that should be attended, and the intentional interim deftly moves through it, and ascertains the right response, that sort of thing. So, I believe that every church could benefit by taking this moment as like a ripe moment, not just a moment to maintain or a moment to, because, now, albeit they might be maintaining a wonderfully healthy and faithful ministry, okay? But this is just a good moment, in between time to review and summarize, and then that way you have the best possibility of lessening undetectable problems, or revisiting some ministry or some focus that they had but they don't have anymore and they'd like to resurrect. So yeah, I heartily endorse and affirm the whole idea of intentional interim ministry because of that discipline.
The training that you received to be an intentional interim pastor, came from some resources through our Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, as I understand. Can you say some things about that?
Yeah, when I was in Metro DC Synod, we were sending quite a few people to a place in North Carolina called the Center for Congregational Health, and they teach intentional interim ministry. Now, we also have training through ELCA Seminary in Gettysburg, and we also have training through locally the Pittsburgh Seminary, which is Presbyterian, and then there are, you know, a multitude of other places wherever you are geographically.
Okay. And there are some helpful ways in which the our national church, our church-wide resources have helped to guide the process of interim, intentional interim ministry.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in the course of my experience at Christus Victor in Metro DC, and given that it was a young church and I was the continuing mission developer, so to speak, you know, I learned a lot. And I saw materials that were helpful at different times from, for instance, the ELCA. The first set of materials that were very helpful was the Living Faith Discipleship material that came out heading into the year 2000. And you know, they scoped out purposes and practices and such, and it was wonderful. Even the biblical foundation material was fantastic, you know, because it covered some really a couple of, you know, essential Bible passages and a reference from the Small Catechism, a reference from the Old Testament. And so you know, it's like I learned that and used it. Then I think the other thing that was fantastic was in 2003, the ELCA Assembly accepted the evangelism strategy. Now, it focused on prayer, on leadership and, you know, development such, discipleship, and church renewal and planting. Well, in my ministry and moving towards what I saw happening, what would happen in interim service, I began to see that as a frame. And so I framed with prayer and leadership, discipleship, and church renewal and planting, and now add all of that to my interim ministry experience, and you begin to be able to have the tools that you can input to a congregation, and they can draw the picture. See, they can give you the specifics it's like a puzzle, and if you get the borders right in some puzzles, you get the borders right, then you can move in towards the center. Well, that's what I do with congregations in interim ministry. You know, I give them a frame, and then I say, okay, let's find the pieces that fit within. Now, the crowning part of this, if crown is the word, I don't know, but over the years, I came to experience a book called The Blueprint for Change by Neal Boese, B-O-E-S-E. And it was a wonderful representation of continuing support for filling in that frame.
That sounds like those are very helpful resources for congregations, folks making their way through these times of transition. More about that whole process with Pastor Dave Wasemann after we take another break here on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Pastor Dave Wasemann about intentional interim ministry. And you've been involved with it for a little while now in Northwestern Pennsylvania, and you spoke about helping helping the people in the congregation or working with them to put the pieces of that puzzle together. Can you say some things? How is it going so far right now? If you're able to say some things about that community and Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel, how are the people responding to that? Are they rallying around that? How's it going?
Well, I think it's interesting because when I was heading into the end of my pastorate in Metro DC Synod at Christus Victor Lutheran Church, you know, I talked to 5 different synods and 5 different presbyteries because in intentional interim ministry, you can serve, you know, especially within our full communion relationships. So well, you know, I prayed and ended up calling Bishop Ralph Jones in Northwest Synod. And he said, well, it's interesting because I have about 3 different possibilities right now. And, you know, in the course of our subsequent conversation, he said, well, you know, I want to offer you this connection or this material from Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel. He had, as we often, always do actually, he had developed a transition team that represented members of both congregations. They had begun a list of concerns they had, emphasis, focal points, whatever. So while I was sitting there in Manassas, he said, okay, I'm going to read you the results of the meeting last night. He said, this. Well, based on my experience, my study and such, I could speak to every one of the points. You know, they were understandable points. The role of the pastor in the congregation, the development and orientation of leadership, and so on and so forth, and the growth of the congregations. You know, this question of, do we have a future? You know, how are we going to pay the next pastor and that sort of thing, you know, which I put in certain perspective. But at any rate, I came and now I've completed a year and have entered into the second year. Now, the first year we dealt with, of course, essential pastoral care, and we dealt with leadership, and you know, and here again, see, we kept in mind the frame: prayer, leadership, discipling, and the last one, the church renewal and planning. Well, the whole first year, I emphasized leadership development, and for that, I gave them what I sort of call a Lutheran Church operating manual, which is Neal Boese's Blueprint for Change. Because Neal is a wonderful Lutheran pastor, has been through mission development, oversight of mission developers, and that sort of stuff, and through his own pain and his own learning and his own vision, he came up with this wonderful tool. So we use that at council meetings and so on and so forth. Well, we've now moved towards a place where Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel are stronger, have experienced some sense of healthy faithfulness and, you know, even future, even more confidence in dealing with that future focal point. And now we're going to be heavy in the next part of this year. We're going to continue emphasizing prayer. We're going to continue with the development of leadership because we have new council members who will review the Blueprint for Change and our processing and everything. And then now we're going to hit hard on the discipling. See? And we're going to do, in some sense, a spiritual inventory of existing leadership, membership, and new people. You know, visitors to worship or people that are interested about Christianity and about it through Harmony Grove and Grove Chapel. So now we're going to do the emphasis on the discipling, see? And through that, we'll get to church renewal. Now, will we get to church planting or mission and ministry planting? I don't know. I think that's going to be interesting. You know, especially as it foresees continuing the connection with our cluster, with our immediate Lutheran congregations, and even with our ecumenical partners. We're seeing, you know, collaboration on prayer and so on and so forth. So it's been interesting, though, and I must say, I have to repeat, the down part of my experience in this first interim is it hits me right in the face and the heart. I'm leaving here. And I know it's sooner rather than later. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one because I go full force into building the relationships and so on and so forth. And, you know, with all ages, the little kids, seniors, and everyone in between. And then you're like, this is weird.
It's, I'm sure that's one of the difficult things about doing what you do. But at the same time, I'm sure that you've also been a great blessing to that community and those congregations, and that in the time that you are there, that good work can be done, seeds can be planted, and that congregations can move forward. David, thank you so much for being with us here today, and for what you've shared. We hope that things continue to go well and are spirit-led there up in Northwest. Thanks so much.
Nice to be here.
And thank you for being with us here on Lutherans Alive. We know that from wherever you're watching, in your community, near your community, there is a Lutheran congregation that would be very pleased to welcome you. Won't you come and worship with us? And won't you come see us next time on Lutherans Alive?